Welcome, to the Cursed Hour, where every whisper in the dark, every creak in the floor, might be something watching threes. If you found this channel, you're already part of the curse. The storm's deception. I had gotten divorced, which left me with just an empty house and not much to do outside of work. The silence of the place was deafening, a constant reminder of what was gone. I filled it with noise, games, voices, anything to keep the void at bay. Gaming with my friends was mostly all I did. My nights were spent online, headset on, lost in virtual worlds with my buddies. It was my escape, my anchor, until the storm came. I knew there was supposed to be a big thunderstorm, and there were even flash flood warnings. But around here, they pretty much send out those warnings every time it rains. So it was never a big deal. I shrugged it off. The sky's threats just background noise. But some threats don't come from the sky. When I was in the middle of a game with my buddies when a sudden massive gust of wind slammed against the window next to me, and the entire house shook. The glass rattled, the walls groaning under the assault. Something was coming. And it wasn't just the weather. I took my headset halfway off, and I could hear rain pouring down and the house creaking and swaying violently. The storm was a beast, clawing at the house, its roar drowning out my thoughts. I felt small, exposed, as if the night was watching. I turned back to my screen to tell everyone what was going on, but suddenly my screen and all the lights in my house flicked off for a split second. Then, right back on. The flicker was brief, a heartbeat of darkness. I saw I was still in the Discord call, so I asked if they could still hear me. But before I got an answer, everything cut out. The screen went black, the lights died, and silence swallowed the house. My PC shut down, and all the lights snapped off. The darkness was absolute, pressing against my eyes. The whole house was dark. I couldn't even see my hands in front of my face. I fumbled for my phone, its light a weak defense against the void. The storm had taken my power, or had it. Annoyed, I got up and walked downstairs and up to the front window. The rain was a torrent, a curtain of water blurring the world outside. Honestly, it was hard to say if everyone else's power was off or not. The street was a shadow, houses dim or asleep. I could barely see anything through the flood of rain that was pouring down. I squinted, searching for signs of life, but found none. I quickly sent a message in the group chat saying I probably wouldn't be on for the rest of the night. My friends' voices were gone, the connection severed. I was alone, truly alone, in a house that no longer felt mine. Frustrated, I used my little phone light to find my way to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, the darkness thicker below. I went down and found my old battery bank. It was dusty, half forgotten, but functional. It wasn't much, but it was enough to plug a few lamps into so I could at least have some light. I grabbed it and started walking back up to the stairs when I thought I heard something behind me. A rustle, faint but real, from the pile of boxes in the corner. My skin prickled, the air suddenly heavy. It was just a bunch of boxes back there, but the wind seemed to pick up as soon as I turned around, so I assumed it was just the storm making the house make noises. I shook it off, my rational mind clinging to the storm as the culprit. I hauled the battery bank up to the first floor and plugged in one of the lamps in the living room. The light was weak, casting long shadows across the room. I'm not sure if this is normal or not, but I hated going to bed with the power out. Sleep felt impossible in the dark, vulnerable, like I had to wait for it to come back on before I'd feel comfortable sleeping. I settled on the couch, the lamp my only ally. But the house wasn't empty, and I didn't know it yet. I opened up the blinds and sat on the couch, then took my phone out and used my data to scroll through YouTube. The videos were a distraction, their sound a frail shield against the storm's howl. But the storm wasn't the only thing moving. I got curious again and opened the front door to look outside. The porch's overhang kept me dry, the rain a wall beyond. My porch had an overhang that blocked most of the rain. So I stepped out and looked around. The street was chaos, water rushing in streams. The storm was still raging on, but the houses across the street didn't seem to be off power. A few windows glowed, faint but steady. My house was singled out, a dark island in a lit sea. At least a couple of them had a light or two on in the windows. I frowned, confusion creeping in. Now I was pretty confused. I stepped back inside, the cold clinging to me. I looked up outages in my area but didn't find much info. The internet was vague, offering no answers. I went back inside. Oddly, I got a text. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a message from an unknown number. It was from a normal unknown phone number, but essentially said that there was down power lines and to expect power outages. The words were clinical, official sounding, but something was off. I had no clue why I got a direct text, though, and the number didn't have an ID like from KMED or whatever. No utility company, no signature, just a number. My gut twisted. A warning I didn't heed. Strange, I thought, but I didn't look much more into it. I dismissed it, too tired to question. I went back to the couch again. The videos played, their sound a drone, but my eyes were on the storm outside. Then I heard it. I heard something from the other side of the house, a single, unmistakable creak, like a foot on the basement stairs. My heart stopped, the sound cutting through the rain's roar. It sounded exactly like a footstep on one of the creaky wooden steps to the basement. I knew that sound, etched into my memory from years in this house. I'd lived here long enough to recognize that sound. I stood, my phone's light trembling in my hand. I got up, but walked slowly and quietly over there, wanting to hear if it happened again. The house was a maze of shadows. The lamp's glow too weak to reach the hall. The house was so dark, and my phone light only lit up a small view in front of me. I moved forward, each step deliberate. I turned the corner into the hallway and shined the light down. Nothing was there. The hall was empty, but my relief was short-lived. However, the basement door was open, like wide open, and there was no way I left it like that. I'd closed it. I was sure. Someone was here. I froze, the air thick with dread. I walked up and shined the light down the stairs, but there was no way I was going to go down there to check anything out. Not with no power on. The darkness below was a void, swallowing the light. I closed the door. My hands shook. The doors clicked too loud in the silence. I don't think I had enough time to really think about what this really meant. I backed away, my mind racing. I walked into the next room. Lightning flashed, illuminating the windows in stark white. Light from the thunderstorm flashed in the windows, but when I looked around, I found nothing. The room was empty, but the feeling wasn't. A feeling built up in me, like something was off, and my gut could sense it. The house was alive, its pulse not mine. Then the footsteps came, heavy, deliberate. They thundered up the basement stairs. I started to walk back when suddenly heavy footsteps came running up the basement stairs. The floor shook, the sound unmistakable. Even behind the closed door, They were loud and shook the whole floor. I didn't think. I acted. Without thinking, I ran up to the door and slammed my body against it. My weight braced the door, my breath ragged. Not even a second later, they were on the other side, trying to open it. The handle rattled, the wood buckling under force. Once they figured out I was there, they started hitting it and ramming their shoulder into it to try to force the door open. The door groaned, each impact a threat. This was a regular basement door, so it had no lock on it. I was all that held it shut. He was there, inches away. His intent a mystery I didn't want to know. I didn't know what else to do. The pounding was relentless, a rhythm of malice. He pounded against it for a minute, but when I pulled my phone out and started calling 911, he stopped. The silence was sudden, jarring. I heard his footsteps go back down the stairs. They faded, but I didn't trust it. I took this chance to get in my car and leave. I bolted outside, the rain soaking me as I fumbled with my keys. I tried to watch from the other side of the road to see if he left. The storm raged, obscuring everything. During the time I waited, I didn't see anything. No figure, no movement, just rain and darkness. 3 officers went in and found nobody inside. The house was empty, the back door ajar. He had left through the back door. He was gone, but not without leaving scars. The truth was worse than the intrusion. What I find most disturbing about this situation is that we confirmed the text I received about the power outage was fake, like from a private, personal phone. The police traced it, a burner number, unlinked to any utility. Whoever this guy was that broke in, he knew enough about me to find my phone number, my name, my number. He'd targeted me, not my house. He knew me, and I didn't know him. He wasn't targeting just some random house. This was personal, planned. We think he texted me once he heard me go outside, probably knowing I was checking if other houses had power and wanting me to not get suspicious and check the breaker box in the basement. The breaker box. He'd been there, flipping the switch. There was no outage. He had shut off my power. The realization was a gut punch. The storm a mere accomplice to his plan. My house was no longer home. No new info on who it could have been or what they wanted has been found out. The police had nothing. No prints, no leads. Just my story and a text. I moved, sold the house, left the memories behind. But the fear stayed, a shadow that follows me. How did he know my number? I changed my number, my locks, my life, but the questions linger. Was he watching me before, waiting for the storm? The text haunts me most. Its words a trap I nearly fell for. What if I'd gone to the basement, checked the breaker? I don't game anymore. Not at night. Not alone. The storm's noise is too much like footsteps. The dark too much like his presence. I'm safe now. But safety is fragile when someone out there knows your name, your number, your home. The phantom knocker. The road stretched into the dark. A ribbon of asphalt cutting through nowhere. I was 24, driving cross-country. The hum of my tires the only sound for miles. The hotel I found was a relic, its dim lights barely piercing the night. I thought it was just a place to crash. I was wrong. The lobby was a tomb, silent, empty, the air thick with dust. The clerk's eyes widened when she saw me, like I'd interrupted something. She handed me a key to a room at the end of a long, shadowed hallway, and I felt it, a prickle of unease, like I was being watched. In my room. I tried to relax, but the quiet was oppressive, broken only by a sudden, violent knock at the door. I opened it to nothing, just an empty hall, but the echo lingered, sharp and deliberate. It wasn't a mistake, it was a warning. The second knock came later, louder, more insistent. My heart pounded as I checked again, finding only silence. The clerk swore I was the only guest, her voice unsteady. I wanted to believe her, but the hotel felt alive, its walls hiding something that knew my name. Then I saw him, a figure in the corner of my room, still as death, eyes glinting in the dark. He didn't speak, didn't move, until I ran. His footsteps thundered behind me, a predator unleashed. I escaped, but the truth was worse. He'd been there all along, waiting for me to notice. I was on my way home, eager to see my family. I'm a 24-year-old male, and at the time I'd been living away from my family while I was studying at an out-of-state college. A break gave me the chance to visit. Our school had a fairly early spring break, which meant I'd get to go home and visit my family. The drive was long, tedious. It was about a 2-day drive to get there, and mostly through long, boring roads. I preferred it to flying. I'd take the drive over flying any day. Though, I started early, making good time. I actually woke up early and hit the road well before I planned to. So I was doing great on time. My plan was loose. I didn't have the route really planned out. Though, I just had a general idea of where I'd be making my first overnight stop at. After hours on the road, I was done. I drove almost 10 hours straight, only stopping for food and gas. I decided I'd done enough for today. At a gas station, I searched for a place to stay. And at the next gas station, I pulled up the map and looked for the nearest hotel I could stay at. I was in the middle of nowhere. But I knew there had to be something within 20 to 30 miles at least. Thankfully, I found one. It was close. It wasn't too far. Actually, the route took me off the highway. The directions told me to go down the road behind the gas station away from the highway. The road was dark, old. This road looked very old and had very few streetlights that didn't do much for lighting up the road, and there were no cars coming down. I passed a quaint town. I drove a short distance, passing through a very small, old-fashioned town, and at the end of the street was the hotel. The hotel was ancient, uninviting. It was a small building just as old as all the others. I parked alone. I parked in the empty parking lot, then grabbed my bags and walked inside. The lobby was eerie, dimly lit. The lights were very dim, like weirdly dim, and nobody was at the counter. It was too quiet. As I stood there, I just looked around. It was so quiet. No kids running around or TVs on in the lobby. It was just empty. A woman appeared, startled. After a minute, someone finally came walking down the back hallway, and she looked startled when she saw me. She checked me in quickly. She quickly walked up to the front counter and greeted me, then got me a room for the night. I headed to my room. I thanked her and walked down the hallway. She gave me the room all the way at the end. The room was basic, worn. I unlocked it and got in. I didn't even unpack anything really. I just sat on the small sofa and went on my phone for a while. The room wasn't very big or nice, which I wasn't expecting. It felt like a family-run place. Anyway, this was clearly just an older and smaller, probably family-run hotel. I dozed off on the couch. I remember just laying on my back on the sofa, scrolling through videos on my phone, and I guess falling asleep. A loud knock woke me. I woke up abruptly to someone knocking on the room door. I quickly sat up, shaken by how sudden and loud it was. No one was there. Concerned, I got up and walked over to the door, opening it. Nobody was there. The hallway was empty. I poked my head out and looked down the hallway. I stayed there for 30-ish seconds, really confused and waiting for someone to come back around or something. But the hotel was really quiet still. I doubted myself. Everything was so off. I started second-guessing myself. Like, was the knock even at my door? It sounded like it was, and I didn't hear anyone else in any of the rooms near me. But maybe somehow it was for one of the other rooms. I tried to relax, showered, and went to bed. I went back to the couch for a little bit, then took a shower and got ready for bed. I really wanted to sleep good tonight because, for one, I was really tired, and two, I had another long drive ahead of me. Another knock jolted me awake. However, I woke up again in the middle of the night to someone knocking on the door. I jumped up again, and this time I hurried up to the door. Darkness cloaked the room. The whole room was dark, and I could only see the sliver of light coming out from under the door. No one was there. I swung it open, but nobody was there again. I did the same thing, looking down the hall and listening. I went to the front desk. After a minute, I decided that this was too strange to not investigate a little further. Tiredly, I walked down the hallway into the front desk. It was still eerie. It was just as dark and quiet as it was when I first arrived here. The clerk was there. The woman was still at the desk. Though, I reported the knocks. I told her someone had been knocking on my door and asked if she saw anyone. She seemed puzzled, then serious. The woman looked really confused, and almost as if I was joking. When she realized I wasn't, she then said that I was the only guest staying here tonight. I brushed it off, returning to my room. I just smiled and said, "Okay," then started walking back to my room. I don't think it had really set in yet. Like, was I just going crazy? I locked up tight. I got back to my room and went in. I made sure that all the locks were in place, then got in bed. I couldn't sleep. Reaching for my phone, I just laid there for a minute, staring at the pitch-black ceiling and trying to think about what was going on before I decided to grab my phone from the nightstand and maybe watch a video or two to get me to relax. Then I saw him, a figure in the corner. However, right when my screen turned on, it lit up the room just enough for me to see something in the corner by the bed. I jumped up and backed away from the bed. There was someone there standing in the dark in the back corner of the room. They were still motionless, just watching me. Panic surged. My heart was burning from how hard it was pounding in my chest. I hurried over to the door. He charged as I fled. As soon as I began removing all the locks, I heard them start rushing up behind me. Their loud footsteps against the floor got closer and closer as I finally swung open the door and sprinted down the hallway. The clerk saw him chasing me. The front desk woman jumped when she saw me, but her eyes quickly darted past me. The man was running up behind me. She called for help. She started calling 911, but just when the guy got into the lobby, he sprinted out the door. He vanished into the night. He didn't get into a car or anything. He just ran off. She was clueless about him. The woman explained that she had no idea who that was and that he should not have been inside the hotel. Again, saying that I was the only guest checked in for the night. The police found little. Police came and did a rather quick investigation. The hotel only had 2 working cameras, one in the lobby and one outside, so it wasn't all that useful. He'd slipped in during my absence. The only thing we know is that the man definitely slipped into my room while I was asking the woman about the knocking. His motive was a mystery. We don't know what he wanted from me or why he was even there at all. I left immediately. I got my things and left that night, obviously not wanting to stay any longer. It scarred me. I still have no idea what that was about. but it was definitely the most terrifying experience of my life. The incident left me shaken. The drive home, a blur of paranoia. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following. Back home, I couldn't shake the image of his silhouette, motionless, watching. A week later, I got a call from the hotel clerk. She'd quit, too rattled to stay. She'd found something in the lobby after I left, a scrap of paper with my name and room number, scribbled in jagged handwriting. The police dismissed it, saying it could have been anyone's. I started researching, digging into the town's history. Locals whispered about that hotel, about guests hearing knocks, seeing shadows. One story stood out. A drifter, years ago, who'd targeted lone travelers, slipping into rooms, never caught. Was it him or someone new? I couldn't know. I moved apartments, changed my routines, but the fear clung. Last month, I found a keychain in my mailbox. No note, shaped like a tiny hotel key. It wasn't mine. I don't sleep well anymore. Always listening for that knock, wondering if he's still out there, waiting to finish what he started. The shadows in the forest, you and Henry, your best friend, are itching for a real adventure. Tired of the crowded campgrounds near home, the forest calls, vast and untouched, promising a solitude you've never tasted. I was going on a camping trip with my best friend. I'm going to call him Henry. You're not experts, but you're ready to step beyond the familiar, to claim a piece of the wild. We'd done a few trips before, but we still mostly considered ourselves new to it. You find a remote site online, 3 hours away, a 4-hour hike into a forest few visit. We did some research and found a place about 3 hours from us. It was a 4-hour hike into the forest, and it only had a couple pictures from previous campers, so it didn't seem like it'd be busy. The drive is long, the road narrowing to a dirt track swallowed by trees. You park at a small clearing, the only car in sight. There was a very small dirt area on the end of an otherwise unused road, in the middle of the forest. Nobody else was parked there. The trail ahead is faint, overgrown with weeds, its edges blurred by neglect. The trail looked like an actual trail, or at least it looked like it was one at some point. It hadn't been kept up with, so some parts were overgrown and weathered. It feels abandoned, a path forgotten by time. But you press on, packs heavy, hearts light. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere, it seemed. So, I wasn't expecting the most taken care of trail, but this looked like it was abandoned for years. Still, we kept walking. The forest thickens, branches clawing at your clothes, but you reach the campsite, a grassy hill with a sweeping view. It thinned out as we got further into the forest, but we got to the campsite. It was no more than a grassy area on top of a small hill, but it had a decent overlook of the forest and was very secluded. It's empty, untouched, as if no one's been here in years. Nobody else was there, and from the looks of it, nobody had been there in a long time. You set up camp, Henry fussing with his tent while you wander to the overlook. We set up our tents and got everything unpacked. Henry was taking a bit longer than me, so while I waited, I walked up to the overlook and just enjoyed the view. Below, the forest is a tangle of green, but something stirs, a flicker of movement, figures weaving through the trees. While I was there, I noticed something move in the trees below us. I barely caught a glimpse of a group of people walking. 4 or 5 shapes, too distant to discern, vanish into the foliage. Maybe 4 or 5 of them. From where I was, though, I couldn't see anything aside from their basic figures moving through the forest. You call Henry, but they're gone before he arrives. I tried to point them out to Henry, but by the time he came over, They were already gone, disappeared in the forest. The forest feels less empty now. Its silence heavier. You spend the day exploring, chatting, the unease fading under the sun's warmth. After a few minutes, we were back to going about our day. As night falls, you build a fire. Its glow a small defiance against the dark. We built up a small campfire and sat around it. The forest is quiet. Your voices the only sound. The night was calm for the first couple hours. It was quiet, only the sound of us talking. Then, a murmur breaks the stillness. Voices, faint, weaving through the trees. But then we heard something else. It was faint, but we both heard it. It sounded like voices, multiple, talking back and forth. You strained to listen, the words indistinct, their source unmoving. We couldn't tell what they were saying, or even if they were speaking our language. It was coming from way out in the trees, though, which made it really creepy. You and Henry freeze, unsure, the fire's light shrinking the world to your small circle. Henry and I didn't know what to do, so we just listened for a bit. The voices halt abruptly, the silence suffocating. But the voices didn't seem to move. They stayed in the same spot out there until they suddenly went quiet. A single set of steps approaches. Then there were footsteps, just one set walking toward us. A man emerges, his red baseball cap vivid in the firelight, his wavy hair framing a wide smile. A man came out of the dark and into the light of our campfire. He had a distinct red baseball cap and longish, wavy black hair. His smile was wide as he walked up to us. He asks for the trail, claiming he's lost. Either of you know where the trail is around here? I've been looking for a while. You pointed out, but his lingering gaze unsettles you. I said, yeah, and pointed ahead at the trail. You ask about the others, probing. I then asked if the others out there were with him. His smile falters, then returns, too bright. His face fell flat for a moment. Then he smiled again and looked back at where I was looking. He denies seeing anyone, insisting he's alone. I didn't know there were others out here. I've just been hiking alone. I would have asked them for directions if I saw them. His lie is blatant. He came from the voices' direction. It was really strange, though I was almost sure he was lying. He came from the same direction we just heard the voices in. He leaves, but the air feels wrong. I just said, okay, and he smiled, then left and went down the trail. You and Henry debate, his denial gnawing at you. Henry was thinking the exact same thing as I was, that the guy was lying for some reason. Why hide the others? But the more unsettling question is, why was he lying? Why didn't he want to tell us about the others in the forest? You talk, the fire dimming, the forest pressing closer. We discussed this around the campfire for a while, trying to figure out what the hell was going on, or if there even was something going on. The sense of being watched grows, your eyes darting to the trees. The whole time it felt like we were being watched. I kept turning around and looking at the forest and at the trail. Henry suggests leaving, his voice trembling. "Should we just leave?" Henry finally said in a shaken voice. You agree, the unease too thick to ignore. After some thought, I said yes. You pack quickly, the forest unnaturally still. A single step breaks the silence behind you, just as we tossed our bags on our shoulders and stomped out the campfire. A single footstep in the leaves behind me. We both swung our heads around. The darkness is absolute without the fire. Without the fire, it was pitch black. Your hand trembles, pulling out your flashlight. After a moment, my shaky hand reached into the side of my backpack and got out my flashlight. The beam catches him, the red-capped man, standing close, his stare blank. I pointed it out and on. Standing only 10 or 15 feet in front of me was that same guy from before, with the red baseball cap. He was standing in place, already looking at us, and had a blank stare. His smile returns, wide and wrong. As I held the light on him, he made that same wide smile from before. You kill the light and run. Henry beside you, the trail a blur underfoot. In a panic, I turned off the light, and both of us sprinted to the trail. Footsteps pound behind you, others crashing through the woods. Disturbingly, I could hear multiple other footsteps chasing behind us, and some even sounding like they were running through the woods beside us. They fade, leaving only your ragged breaths. Slowly, though, they started to fade out. Eventually, it was just us two running down the dark trail. You reach the car, unscathed, and drive away. We made it back to the car, unharmed. We got in and drove away. The forest recedes, but its weight lingers. We were both pretty shaken for a while after that. You never returned to the forest. The experience a scar on your love for camping. It's been a long time since this happened, but we haven't been out camping at all. I don't know if we ever will. You search online, finding whispers of that campsite. Hikers reporting voices, figures in the trees, a red-capped man who asks for directions but never leaves. Locals speak of a group living off-grid, their purpose unknown, their presence a warning. Was he their scout? Their lure? You check your gear now, avoid remote trails. The forest's silence a reminder of eyes you never saw. Somewhere, they're still out there, waiting for the next campfire to flicker. The stalker in the field. The dirt road to my house was a dark ribbon under the Utah sky. The highway's hum a distant memory. I lived on the edge of nowhere, my 40 acres a patchwork of forest and field. My home a lone sentinel against the night. I'd just returned from town, groceries in hand, when I felt it, a prickle on my neck, the sense of eyes watching from the shadows. Someone was out there, closer than they should be. It started in the store, a fleeting glance I couldn't shake. A man, unremarkable but persistent, his gaze lingering too long as I moved through the aisles. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of timing, but he followed me, silent, his presence a weight I couldn't ignore. By the time I reached my car, he was there again, standing in the lot, empty-handed, staring. My keys trembled as I drove away, the dusk swallowing the town behind me. Home should have been safe, but the night had other plans. As I carried groceries inside, a shape caught my eye. A truck, parked on my land, its lights off, its silhouette stark against the stars. No one came out here, not without reason, and that truck wasn't lost. It was deliberate, waiting, like the man in the store. My pulse quickened, my eyes locked on the darkness, searching for movement. Inside, I tried to dismiss it. A tired driver, a coincidence, nothing more. But the house felt different. Its silence too heavy, its corners too dark. I kept the curtains open, watching the truck, its stillness unnerving. Hours passed, the night deepening, until sleep called me upstairs. That's when I heard it. A creak downstairs, sharp and wrong, like a foot on old wood. Someone was inside, and they weren't here to steal. I froze, my heart a drumbeat in the quiet. The creak came again, slow, deliberate, moving through my home. I crept to my room, phone in hand, whispering to the police as the footsteps grew closer. The night exploded into chaos, sirens, shouts, a chase through the field. They caught him, the man from the store, his eyes cold, his intentions darker than the night. I was safe, but the fear stayed, a shadow I couldn't outrun. I live in northern Utah on the edge of a small highway town. There's not really anything but a few stores, truck stops and motel right up along the main highway, a sparse strip of life in an otherwise quiet place. The roads to the outskirts are all dirt, just leading to a few other homes and large private acres of forest and grassy fields. My home, one of the few, surrounded by 40 acres of my own land. I worked remotely from home and finished up, my day spent at a desk, the world outside a distant hum. From there, I headed into town to grab some groceries and stock up on a few items around the house. A routine errand in a town where the highway wasn't actually all that busy, so none of the stores were ever too crowded. The aisles wide, the faces familiar. I pulled in and started shopping, my cart rattling as I moved through the store. While I was in there, though, I happened to notice a guy looking at me, his glance quick but heavy, like it carried intent. At first, I thought nothing of it. I probably just looked over at him, at an awkward timing, while he happened to be looking over at me. A coincidence, nothing more. I kept going about my shopping, but a couple minutes later, and in a different aisle, I saw him again in the corner of my eye, his presence too close, too deliberate. He walked into the same empty aisle I was in and stood just 5 or 6 feet to the side of me, not browsing, not moving, just there. I kept looking forward and tried to find what I needed, but I noticed he wasn't really moving around or grabbing anything, his stillness unnerving. So I just shifted my eyes a little bit over so I could kind of see him better. Even though I wasn't looking directly at him, I could tell he was looking at me, his gaze a pressure on my skin. This time I said hi, then continued about my business, my voice steady, casual. The man didn't say anything back to me, his silence louder than words. I hurried up and grabbed what I needed and left the aisle, my steps quick, my heart ticking faster. Honestly, I just thought the dude was a little weird, but I wasn't thinking too hard about it. Not yet. I went to the checkout counter and paid for everything, then headed back out to my car, the evening air cool, the lot half empty. I parked in the far back of the lot like I usually did, liking the walk, the space. I tossed everything in the trunk and got in. And when I looked up at the rest of the parking lot, there were maybe 30 or 40 other cars. But something felt off, a shift in the air, a wrongness. Then I saw him again. He was standing between a couple cars looking over in my direction, his figure stark against the fading light. He didn't have any groceries in his hand, so I don't think he even checked out or got anything. His purpose unclear, unsettling. The hell was up with this guy? My mind racing, half joking, half alarmed. Probably some creepy trucker running on 2 hours of sleep or something, but the humor didn't stick. I pulled out of the parking lot and started heading home. The dirt roads dark, the world quiet. The sun was mostly down by now, so the empty dirt roads were dark and quiet. My headlights the only guide. I parked out front and brought in the first couple bags of groceries. The house warm, familiar. While putting that stuff away, I got a little sidetracked by a phone call from my dad, his voice a brief anchor. But eventually I got back to it and headed back outside to my car to grab the rest of the groceries. The night now fully settled. When I did, I saw something. I had to squint. and let my eyes adjust to the dark for a moment, but far out. And kind of off the side of the dirt road, there was a truck. Its shape looming. Unnatural. Its lights were all off. I could only see the general shape of it, silhouetted by the night sky. A silent intruder on my land. I own just under 40 acres of land, so where that truck was on my property. Its presence, a violation. It definitely wasn't there when I drove home. The road empty minutes before. And if it was just turning around or lost, why would it be parked with no lights on? The question a knot in my chest. I slowly walked up to my car and got my groceries out, keeping an eye on the truck the entire time. My movements deliberate, my senses sharp. The best possibility I could think of was that it could be just some regular driver that pulled off the highway and thought that this empty land would be a good place to sleep instead of paying for a motel. A rational excuse. But it didn't fit. Even though it was on my property, I wasn't going to make a fuss if I didn't have to. Caution overriding anger. You never know who could be in there or what they might do. The thought keeping me alert. I went back inside, the groceries heavy in my arms, the truck heavier in my mind. After tossing the groceries away, I opened up the curtains on the front of the house, just so I could keep an eye out there. The window, a fragile barrier. Over time, say the next hour or so, I felt less and less nervous about it, and thought that it was almost surely a driver sleeping. The logic soothing, but not enough. Still strange but harmless, I told myself. Settling into the living room. I spent another hour in the living room watching a show and never saw the truck move, its stillness both reassuring and unsettling. It was getting late, so I closed the curtains and went upstairs to get in bed. The house quiet, the night deep. I think I fell asleep pretty quickly, exhaustion winning out. Then, the night turned. In the middle of the night, I woke up having to use the restroom. My eyes heavy, my body sluggish. I got up half asleep and walked across the bedroom floor and into the hallway where the bathroom was. The house dark, familiar. As soon as I opened the door, I heard a creak downstairs. A sound that didn't belong. Sharp and wrong. I'd never heard that happen before. The house too old for random noises. I listened for a second, then closed and reopened the door to see if it happened again. But it didn't. The silence worse than the sound. I walked to the end of the hallway and looked down the stairs. It was all dark down there, only a small amount of moonlight coming in from the kitchen windows. The shadows thick, unyielding. But there was something in that downstairs hallway. I could see a shadow moving ever so slightly on the side of the wall. A faint shift, like breath on glass. I couldn't tell if it was actually in the hallway or maybe outside the back door, and the shadow was just reflecting onto the wall. But I immediately felt my heart pumping, fear flooding my veins. I quietly backed up and went back into my room, closing the door as slowly and carefully as I could, so as to not bring any attention. My hands trembling, my breath shallow. Then I got my phone and called the police. I kept my voice low, whispering the address, the situation, my fear. For the first 5 minutes I waited. I didn't hear anything. The house a tomb. My doubt creeping in. I started doubting that they were in my home until suddenly I heard creaking again. Very slow and very subtle, walking across the floor below me. Each step a confirmation. It sounded like they went into the living room, closer now. Too close. The air grew heavy. The house no longer mine. A minute later, a cop car showed up, its lights slicing through the dark. There was a scurry of footsteps running around down there, and eventually leaving my home, just as the officers ran up. A chaotic blur of sound. Thankfully, they caught him running back up toward the truck that was parked in the field, his figure unmistakable in the headlights. Disturbingly, I recognized him as the creepy guy from the store earlier, his face now twisted. Caught. I guess he really was stalking me. The truth, a cold weight. Even worse than him following me and breaking into my home, he was armed. A knife glinting in his belt. The guy claimed he was just trying to rob me, but from the looks of it, it seemed way more personal than that. His eyes too focused, too intent. And I don't know how long he was inside my home for, but he never took anything. No bag, no loot. He didn't even have a backpack to take anything with. Plus, he knew I was home. His presence deliberate, predatory. He probably was watching me from somewhere outside all night, a ghost in the field, biding his time. What he really would have done is better left unknown. But the possibilities haunted me. The police were efficient, their questions sharp but kind. They found his truck, empty except for a blanket and a bottle of water, parked exactly where I'd seen it. He'd broken in through a back window, the latch old and weak, leaving no trace until the creak betrayed him. They didn't know why he'd targeted me. Maybe the store was a chance encounter. Maybe he'd seen my car before. Maybe something darker. His record was spotty, petty theft and loitering. But nothing like this. They took him away, the night swallowing his silhouette. But the fear stayed. A stain on my home. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I walked the house, checking locks, closing curtains, jumping at every sound. The field felt different now. Its openness a threat, its shadows alive. I installed new locks, a security system, even motion lights that bathed the dirt road in harsh white. My dad came by the next day, his worry quiet but fierce, helping me board up the back window until it could be replaced. The house was mine, but it wasn't safe. Not anymore. Every trip to town, I scanned the aisles, the lot, looking for faces that lingered too long, eyes that didn't blink. The man was gone, but his shadow wasn't. And I wondered how many nights he'd watched, how close he'd come, before the creak gave him away. The stranger at the door. This was during a road trip last summer. The open road stretched before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through endless forests. I was alone, weaving my way home after visiting relatives, each mile a step closer to familiarity. But the woods felt too quiet, their shadows too deep, like they were hiding something. The dashboard glowed softly, my only companion in the gathering dusk. Was that a flicker of movement in the trees, or just my tired eyes? I was taking a long route home from visiting a few relatives, so I was driving about 4 hours each day to a different destination. This was after my last stop. The journey had been exhausting, a blur of highways and small towns. Tonight, the world seemed to shrink, the road narrowing as the trees closed in. Everything left on the last 8 hours of driving home was just empty woods. The emptiness was oppressive, a void that whispered of secrets untold. As far as I knew, there was another city I wanted to stop at, but it was just too far out of the way for me to justify stopping there. I craved rest, a place to recharge before the final stretch. From my previous stop, I left to get to my final Airbnb that I had booked at a cabin about 2 hours away. It happened to be on the route home, so that's why I went with it. The promise of a cozy cabin was a lifeline, but the isolation gnawed at me. I figured it'd be better than whatever cheap and crappy motel there was along the road. Where I was, the landscape was pretty flat, but there were a decent amount of trees scattered around. When I pulled up to the cabin, It was clear they had planted a row of large pine trees perfectly in a line at the front of the cabin, with the gravel driveway going through the middle. The pines stood like silent guards, their needles whispering in the breeze. Their symmetry was unnatural, a barrier between the cabin and the world. Honestly, the outside of it mixed with the landscape was a little bit spooky. I parked and unlocked the padlock with the code I had emailed from the host. The gravel crunched under my tires, the sound swallowed by the night. Despite the outside, on the inside, the cabin looked newly renovated, probably to be an Airbnb, but it was really nice. Small, but cozy. Yet, the warmth felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. I didn't unpack much since I'd only be there for the night. The cabin was a haven, or was it a trap? I sat at the table and ate a meal I'd picked up from a drive-thru. The burger was cold, but it grounded me in the quiet. The cabin's walls seemed to lean in, listening to my every move. But only 10 minutes after I'd gotten settled in, there was a knock at the door. The sound was sharp, a violation of the silence. It startled me because I never heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. My pulse quickened, the burger forgotten. I got up and answered the door. There was a man looking about 40-ish with a gray and black beard and shaved head. His smile was too wide, his eyes too bright. "Hi, I was just stopping by to make sure you got in, and everything was good," he said with a smile. His voice was smooth, but it carried an edge, like a blade hidden in velvet. Knowing it was just the host now, I said I was good, and it was all great. I then said goodnight and shut the door. My hand lingered on the knob, doubt creeping in. I thought it was a bit strange he showed up unannounced just to ask if I was okay, but I thought he must have lived close by or maybe even on the other side of the property or something. Also, it's worth mentioning that the guy had an unusually strong odor coming from him. It smelled like maybe he'd been working out in a field all day. The smell clung to the air, sour and unnatural, like decay masked by sweat. I just found it a bit odd as well. I shook it off, returning to my meal. I went back to the table and finished eating, then took a shower to wind down for the night. The hot water was a brief escape, but the cabin's silence pressed against me. I was only in there for maybe 5 minutes before feeling tired enough and just wanting to lay in bed already. I dried off and hopped in bed, staying on my phone for a little bit, when there was another knock at the front door. The sound was a jolt, ripping through the calm. This one scared me just as much as the first time because, again, I never heard a car pull up or anyone walking outside. My heart pounded, the phone trembling in my hand. It had to be the host again. But why? And so soon after, he just came over. The question gnawed at me, a warning I couldn't ignore. Immediately, I knew this was odd, and I felt really uncomfortable. I checked my phone, and of course, there was no text or call from him. The screen's glow offered no answers, only questions. I slowly walked into the main room, hearing him knock several more times. Each knock was louder, more insistent, like a demand. I wasn't sure if I wanted to answer the door or not, but I ended up just calling out from the other side and asking what he needed. My voice wavered, betraying my fear. He stopped knocking. The silence was worse, a void filled with menace. "Can you open the door, please? I just wanted to ask you one more thing. I'll be quick. I promise." His tone was too calm, too rehearsed. I didn't respond for a few seconds because I honestly didn't know what to say. In those few seconds, he must have gotten impatient because he knocked on the door again and asked if I could open it. My skin crawled, every instinct screaming danger. I said it was late and I wasn't in the mood, so if there wasn't an emergency, then I'd like to be left alone. He took a long time to answer after that. The silence was really eerie. It stretched, suffocating, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. Once it reached a whole minute, it was even more so. I didn't hear him walk away. So, was he just standing out there? The thought chilled me. A predator waiting in the dark. I quietly walked up and looked through the small window on the door. He wasn't out there. Relief flickered, then out. I immediately thought that he must have snuck away because surely I would have heard his footsteps on the gravel if he just walked away. But then, where was he? I didn't know what to do. I felt really uncomfortable and didn't know why he was acting so strange. The cabin felt like a cage, its walls no longer safe. I stood there by the door for a minute and listened for anything. Honestly, I was scared to move. Every creak was a threat, every shadow a foe. But then I happened to glance over at one of the windows in the living room. I saw his eyes staring into mine. They were cold, unblinking. A predator's gaze locked on its prey. I panicked and sprinted to the bedroom where I called 911. My hands shook, the phone slipping as I dialed. While I waited, I heard what sounded like him trying to lift open the window, which was terrifying, but also odd, considering he had to have had a key to his own house. The realization hit like a thunderbolt. He wasn't the host, but that's when I figured it all out. That man wasn't the host. His lies unraveled, each one a thread in a web of deceit. This was confirmed when police arrived. He had already run off. We have no idea in which direction, but we got in contact with the actual host and owner of the cabin. I don't know what that man's intentions were that night. Obviously, he was lying and clearly plotting something, but I'm just glad I didn't open the door. The police searched the woods, their flashlights slicing through the night, but he was gone. The real host was horrified, promising to install cameras and change the locks, but the cabin's warmth was gone, replaced by a chill that lingered in my bones. I packed my bag and left at dawn, the pines watching in silence as I drove away. The road home was long, but the memory of those eyes followed me, a shadow I couldn't outrun. Years later, I learned of other incidents in the area, strangers posing as hosts, targeting lone travelers. The police had few leads, the woods a perfect hideout. Was he still out there, waiting for the next guest? The Airbnb listing vanished soon after, the cabin abandoned to the forest. I never stayed in one again, the trust broken by a stranger's smile. The road trip was meant to be a journey of freedom, but it taught me a darker truth. Safety is an illusion when you're alone in the wild. The shadow with the axe. The forest loomed beyond the windshield, a wall of endless pines. Spring break had arrived, and at 18, I was itching for a change of scenery. It was spring break. I was 18. My family, Mom, my 7-year-old brother, and me piled into our car for a week-long escape to a Minnesota cabin. And this year, my family took a trip to a small cabin out in Minnesota. The trip doubled as a scouting mission for a potential move to one of the state's quiet towns. We were planned to stay at this cabin for the whole week, and part of the reason we were going to Minnesota was to check out some of the smaller towns. The cabin was a gamble. Mom booked it online, likely swayed by the low price, unaware of its isolation. The cabin my mom booked we had never been to before, and I don't think she knew how far out it was from the closest towns. Tucked far north, it was a 35-minute drive from the nearest store. It was really far north, and about 35 minutes out from any shopping areas. The distance tested our readiness for rural life. I guess it was a good test at how good we'd handle the rural life. Though, after a 10-hour drive, split between me and Mom, we arrived at sunset, the sky ablaze with orange over the forest. The drive there was a little over 10 hours. I drove the first few hours, and my mom drove the rest. The cabin was ancient. Its weathered wood groaned underfoot, a far cry from our city's towering skyscrapers. We got to the cabin at sunset. It was really pretty. The orange skies setting over the dense forest and wildlife. The structure looked amateurish, like a DIY project gone awry. The cabin itself was noticeably old. However, everything. And it didn't look like the place was professionally built. Still, it was cozy enough. It was fine. Though, it was a cabin after all. We settled in, lighting the fireplace to ward off the chill. We settled in for the night, testing out the wood-burning fireplace. I couldn't sleep. Exhausted from the drive, I napped through the evening, leaving me restless as Mom and my brother retired early. I ended up napping for most of the evening. My mom went to bed around 8:30, but because I took a long nap, I stayed up a bit later, alone in the living room. I scrolled my phone by the fire's glow. My little brother was also in his room, so it was just me hanging out in the cabin, craving fresh air. I stepped onto the back porch, a rickety deck with a fire pit and scattered chairs. I sat by the fireplace on my phone for a bit, then thought I'd get some fresh air and check out the back porch. The night was still. No city noise, just the faint call of a distant bird and the whisper of wind through the trees. The night was really quiet. No cars or busy streets, just the occasional bird in the distance and the trees in the wind. The northern chill bit deeper than expected, so I grabbed logs from a stack by the cabin and lit the fire pit. Being further up north, though, it was a bit more chilly than I expected. I spotted some logs stacked up on the side of the cabin and figured I'd give the fire pit a try. The flames held steady, casting a warm glow. I lit it up no problem, and the fire stayed well maintained in the center. I sat, savoring the rare solitude. I sat by it for a while. I never get to do this sort of thing, so I just soaked it all in. A sound shattered the peace. 30 minutes into my vigil, a sharp noise echoed from the forest, like metal striking wood. After about 30 minutes of being outside, there was a very sudden and just completely out of nowhere sound from within the forest. It was singular, jarring, impossibly close. I had no clue what it could have been, but I did think that the way it sounded and echoed through the trees was kind of like an axe chopping into a tree or wood. No one could be out there in the pitch black, could they? It was only one sound. Though, and I didn't think it was really possible for anyone to be out here near us. Unease crept in, the tranquility ruined. As I stayed out there for the next 5 minutes after hearing the sound, I felt my nerves building up a little bit. I retreated inside. I doused the fire and slipped back into the cabin, the silence of my sleeping family amplifying my nerves. I ended up snuffing out the fire pit and heading back into the cabin. Still wired, maybe from the nap, maybe from the sound, I stayed up, watching a downloaded movie on my phone. I still wasn't all that tired. Though, I stayed up in the living room on my phone. I had some movies downloaded, so I didn't have to worry about Wi-Fi. 15 minutes in, another noise stopped me cold. Only 15 or so minutes in, I heard something. It wasn't the cabin settling. I paused the movie, straining to hear. I paused the movie and listened. The sound came again, not from the bedrooms but from outside, near the living room wall. It was only a minute later that I heard it again. Though, this time it was from the opposite end of the cabin, not where the bedrooms were. A window was the only thing there. It was from the outside the wall, just next to me. The only thing there was a window, I leaned closer, heart racing, when a barrage of heavy knocks shook the front door. Just when I thought I might be hearing something, a loud sequence of shook the entire building. Panic surged. The knocks reverberated through the cabin, waking Mom, who rushed into the hall, her voice trembling. It vibrated across the walls. I froze up for a moment. My mom got out of bed and rushed into the hall, asking what that was. I stood, admitting someone was at the door, my gut screaming danger. I was standing up at this point, knowing something was wrong, but told her someone was at the door. Mom grabbed her phone, dialing 911. No one should be here, not in this remote nowhere. She immediately went back to get her phone and call 911 because there was no reason for anyone to be banging on our cabin door in the middle of nowhere. I saw him, creeping to the door. I peered through the peephole into the darkness. As she did, I walked up to the door and looked out the peephole. No porch light, but I made out a man's silhouette, staring blankly, a heavy axe in his hand. There were no porch lights or anything, but I could see the basic figure of a man standing fairly close, just staring ahead at the door. And in the dark, I could see the outline of a heavy wooden axe in his hand. Terror gripped me. My mind raced for innocent explanations. Lost hiker, stranded driver, but nothing fit. I felt my eyes widen and nerves spiking. Everything rushed through my mind. The man knocked again, harder, silent otherwise. The man banged on the door several more times as my mom was on the phone with an operator. No words, no pleas for help, just relentless pounding. They never spoke though, stating any excuse for them being here. They just aggressively knocked on the door. Time dragged, each knock a hammer to my nerves. In the heat of the moment, it was hard to tell how much time passed. It felt like forever. Though, he struck. A deafening blow hit the door, the axe's blade piercing the wood. But then he did what we were all terrified of. One loud slammed into the door, and the slightest bit of the metal axe pierced through the wood. We fled to the farthest room, locking ourselves in, hearts pounding. At that point, we all ran into the farthest room and locked ourselves in. More strikes followed. 4, maybe 5. Then silence. We heard more hits against the door, but only 4 or 5 before they stopped. Had he broken through? We weren't sure if he'd busted the door down already or if he had given up. But we just waited. The police arrived. Less than 15 minutes later, an officer reached us, faster than I dared hope. It took just under 15 minutes for the first officer to arrive to the cabin, which was honestly quicker than expected given how far out we were. The door bore deep gashes, but held. The front door had several large gashes in it, but there were no signs of the man having gotten in. The man was gone, vanished into the forest. There were also no signs of where the man went. It's just assumed that he walked back out into the forest. The theory was my fire pit's glow drew him, a beacon in the dark. The running theory is the guy was out in the forest when he saw my campfire from all the way out there, luring him to the cabin. We didn't stay. We packed and left at dawn. The cabin's scars a grim reminder. We obviously didn't stay there any longer. Minnesota's small towns lost their appeal. We never moved. In case you were wondering, we didn't end up moving there either. The axe, the knocks, the silent figure, they haunt me. It doesn't explain what he was doing out there at night with an axe or why he came up to the cabin. I lock every door now, avoid the wilderness, and wonder what drove a man to wield an axe against strangers in the night. The unseen threat. The group home's sterile halls echoed with quiet compassion, a place where I'd poured my heart for nearly a decade. I'm a 36-year-old female in Sweden. I have worked in mental health care for the last 18 years. At 30, I'd seen the best and worst of the human mind, guiding patients through their darkest moments. I was working at a group home for 9 years and was very close with my coworkers there, especially 2 females, my colleagues. 2 women I trusted like sisters, shared laughter and tears over countless shifts. The last few years I worked there, another female started working there. Let's call her M. And the 4 of us grew very close. M was shy, her presence soft but warm, and we welcomed her into our circle. But as summer's light faded, a new job and a new roommate would pull me into a nightmare I never saw coming. M's quiet demeanor hid a struggle we all understood too well. She was very shy, but we got along well. However, she was often on sick leave because of her own mental health issues, but she was able to hang out with us after work. Her absences were frequent, yet she joined our after-work gatherings with a smile. She told us that she had a history of schizophrenia, just like the patients we were treating, but that she was medicated and hadn't had any psychotic episodes for years. Her candor about her condition, so like our patients, deepened our bond. In the summer of 2023, I moved on to work at a new place, this time doing forensic psychiatry. The 4 of us stayed in touch. My new role in forensic psychiatry was grueling, but our friendship held strong until M's life unraveled, pulling me into her chaos. One message from her would change everything, setting a trap I'd walk into with open arms. The city's hum was a distant comfort as I read M's desperate text. One day, M told us she had been evicted from her apartment because of an incident where she had accidentally entered her neighbor's apartment in the middle of the night. Her story was odd, a mistaken door in a vast complex, leading to police and eviction. She told us that in the huge apartment complex, the doors all look exactly the same, and that she simply walked through the wrong door by accident, which made them call the police on her. It felt extreme, a punishment too harsh for a simple mistake. I felt that sounded out of proportion to evict someone just from that. So, I questioned her if something else happened, but she claimed that was the full story. Her insistence rang hollow, but her plea for help was real. I opened my door to her, unaware that her secrets would soon threaten everything I held dear. My small apartment, a sanctuary for me and my cats, suddenly felt too small. In Sweden, it's very difficult to get a contract for an apartment when you have gotten evicted. So M asked me if she could move in with me, with nowhere else to go. M's plight tugged at my heart, since she was literally on the street. I took her in. Unfortunately, I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment with 2 cats. We made do, her on the couch, me in my room. We decided that M was going to stay in the living room, and she said she was fine sleeping on the couch. A curtain divided our spaces, a thin barrier for privacy. But as M settled in, her presence began to erode the peace I'd fought so hard to maintain, hinting at a darkness I couldn't yet see. The first night, my insomnia flared, my sleep fragile under the weight of M's restlessness. I hung up a curtain covering the entry to the hallway to give her some privacy. She wasn't working at this time, but I was. So I often had to get up at 6 a.m. My early shifts demanded rest, a luxury my condition made scarce. I have really severe insomnia, and even with sleep medication, I still wake up easily. I told her I would appreciate it if she would try to stay quiet those nights when I have to get up early. M's nighttime movements, smoking breaks, footsteps, jarred me awake. The first night together, M had been up several times that night to go out to smoke. I woke up every time. By dawn, her coffee making roused me again, a small act that felt like a violation. I pleaded for quiet, but her promise was empty. The first crack in a foundation that would soon crumble. M's disregard for my sleep became a daily torment. At 5:00 a.m., she started making coffee, and since it's literally outside my bedroom door, I was wide awake from the sounds of it. The kitchen's clatter was a siren, stealing what little rest I'd managed. I asked her in the nicest way possible why she was up this early, like if she had any plans today, and she just said that she couldn't sleep. Her excuse was flimsy, her eyes avoiding mine. I gently reminded her I would appreciate it if she could wait on making the coffee until I was out of bed. I explained my epilepsy, how lack of sleep triggered seizures, endangering my work. Adding to why I need my sleep is that I have epilepsy that gets worse when I don't get enough sleep. She nodded, but the mornings stayed loud, her apologies hollow as my health frayed. The apartment became a battleground of small infractions. She continued to wake me up early in the morning while promising she would stop. Even when I told her that the loss of sleep was literally severely affecting my health, she never respected that boundary. My fridge emptied faster than I could stock it, M's hunger insatiable. Not only was she disturbing my sleep, but she constantly ate through all my food. Her long black hair coated every surface, a constant reminder of her presence. Another thing, M had long black hair that got everywhere, all over the sink, the floor, the bathtub, everywhere. Nail clippings and bathroom messes piled up, ignored despite my hints. She also left her fingernails and toenails on the bathroom floor. There were even drops of urine on the toilet seat every time she had been to the toilet. I placed a broom in plain sight, hoping she'd take the cue, but the chaos grew, mirroring the disorder within her. My life shrank to my bedroom, my cats my only solace. At first, I didn't want to say anything straight out, so I just put a broom and dustpan in the bathroom to imply that we needed to sweep the floor more often. When hints failed, I confronted her, but her promises were empty. This didn't seem to work, and after a while, I did have to mention it. M promised to help out, but nothing ever changed. My new relationship offered a flicker of joy, but M's refusal to give us space dimmed it. After a few weeks of living together, I started dating someone. He was also in a roommate situation, so we had a tough time getting any alone time. I asked M if we could get one night to ourselves every now and then. Her resistance was fierce, her isolation a wall I couldn't breach. Each day, her presence felt less like a guest and more like a shadow, growing darker with time. A friend's offer to host M for a night was a brief reprieve. She claimed she had nowhere to go, no friends or family. I was just asking for a few hours so we could get some quality time together. But M's reluctance turned it into a negotiation. At dinner together one night, one of our old co-workers realized that the situation was really tearing at my mood. She offered that Emma could stay the night at her place. When I returned, my cat's water bowl was dry, a mystery M dismissed. When I came home the morning from my night away, I saw that my cat's water bowl was completely dried out. There was no spill on the floor, and I had filled it to the brim the night before. I asked her how this was possible, but she said that the cats must have tipped it. My cats, once social, now hid, sensing something I couldn't. Then, my grandmother's saucepan, a cherished heirloom, was ruined, left scorched without apology. Aside from that, I had this old saucepan from the 60s that meant a lot to me. It was my grandmother's, and the only thing I have from her. M burnt it one day and made no attempt to clean it. The theft of my sleeping pills was a breaking point. It had probably been 2 months now, and she kept waking me up at night, kept binge eating my food, never cleaned, never left the house, scared my cats, and ruined my things. She even stole my prescription sleeping pills. Lots of them, and I only get one per night. 20 pills vanished. M's denial absurd in our shared space. I had 20 of them in my nightstand when I left for work, and when I came home, they were gone. She denied it, which is pretty hilarious since no one else could have been there. The summer heat trapped us in a pressure cooker. My patience worn thin. Then, a message from an old classmate revealed M's lie. A knife, a baby, a psychosis-fueled break-in. Then my old classmate texted me on Facebook asking me how I know M when he saw I had posted on Facebook that we were roommates now. I told him that we were old co-workers and that she needed a place to stay because she got evicted. He asked if I understood why, and I told him what I knew. But he said that wasn't the full story. In reality, M broke in and snuck up to their sleeping baby with a knife in her hand. The truth hit like a blow. Her danger no longer hypothetical. I needed M gone, but the contract bound us for 30 days. It was, however, clear to me that she had been lying to me about what had happened, including her mental stability. I started getting quite paranoid now and wanted her to move out. We did, however, have a contract that she had 30 days' notice. I approached her gently, offering a hostile solution. So, I wanted to handle this as nicely as I could. I sat her down and broke the news to her as respectfully and lovingly as I could. But she still looked crushed. I showed her a hostel I found and said that I understood it wasn't the ultimate situation, but I really needed her to move out because I felt suffocated. Her agreement was reluctant, but her retaliation swift. The first night after our talk, she got up and made her coffee at 2:30 a.m. The coffee maker's hum at dawn was a deliberate jab. My pleas ignored. Her blank stare, unyielding, chilled me, a sign of something far worse brewing beneath. M's behavior spiraled, each act more defiant. I asked her in the morning for probably the 10th time not to make coffee until I got up, but she didn't even answer me. She just sat on the couch and stared out the window. I locked the coffee maker in my car, a desperate move. I eventually got so pissed off about being woken up by the coffee maker that I unplugged it and locked it in my car. She countered by brewing coffee in a saucepan, her silence deafening. The very next night, I woke up at 4 a.m. by her making coffee in a saucepan. I hid the saucepan too, my frustration mounting. Me being frustrated and at my tipping point. I later took the saucepan and stored it in my car as well. With my boyfriend present, I felt safer. But M's nighttime vigil, standing in my doorway, staring, shattered that. In the doorway, M was standing silently, staring at us. Her retreat left a knife on the floor, a chilling warning. The next day, when I got out of bed, I went out into the hallway and saw a kitchen knife on the floor. I secured every blade, fear now my constant companion. I took all my knives and locked them in my car, with a friend by my side. I demanded him leave immediately. I asked a friend of mine to come to my house and be here when I tell M that she has to move out immediately. Her silence was unnerving. Her exit via text accusing me of disrespect. M, however, didn't even answer when I talked to her. She just kept staring out the window. She left the apartment and sent me a text instead, saying that I was disrespectful for bringing a friend over to her place. That night, she burned coffee in a frying pan, her eyes void of life. I was woken up by her burning dry coffee powder in a frying pan. At this moment, I just felt terrified of her. Her face was dead. Her eyes were black. I extinguished the flames, her flight to the living room a silent admission of her state. Her psychiatrist appointment gave me time to pack her belongings. A final act to reclaim my home. I texted me, offering hostel funds, demanding my keys. Then I sent her a text telling her that she needs to pick them up and give me my keys back, and that I will give her money for a hostel the upcoming 26 days. She returned, wordless, and left with my boyfriend as witness. She gave us the keys without looking at us and left. Relief was tempered by dread. What had I narrowly escaped? M moved in with a new partner, then secured an apartment. A fleeting recovery. Our old co-workers told me she moved in with a guy she was dating, and as she stayed there for a few weeks until she somehow, amazingly got an apartment of her own. But her stability crumbled, her arson revealing the depth of her illness. M then proceeded to burn her entire apartment down because the voices in her head were telling her that she had to burn everything. Her sentence to a mental institution, possibly my old workplace, was a grim irony. She was arrested and sentenced last week for aggravated arson. She will serve her time in a mental institution for a long time, possibly forever. M's trial unveiled her secret. She'd abandoned her medication, believing herself stable. Apparently, M had stopped taking her medication because she thought that it made her feel numb, and she thought she was stable enough to function without it. Those blank stares, the knife, the fire, all signs of her descent into psychosis. She had also stopped taking her medication the last few weeks when she stayed at my house. So those moments when she stared blankly into space, she was going into psychosis. When she burned the frying pan that last night, and when she stared at me with the knife in her hand, I shuddered, realizing how close I'd come to harm. It's disturbing to think about what would have happened to me and my cats if she stayed. Or if I were a heavy sleeper. The baby she'd threatened before haunted me. A near tragedy mirrored in my own escape. I also think about what would have happened to the baby in that apartment before she was evicted. Her eyes, dark and empty, were a memory I couldn't shake. I rebuilt my life, my apartment once again my own. The cats returned to their playful selves, no longer hiding. I installed a lock on my bedroom door, a small reassurance. Therapy helped me process the fear, the guilt of not seeing M's decline sooner. I reached out to colleagues, sharing my story to warn others in our field. A new routine emerged, quieter nights, stricter boundaries, a vigilance born of survival. I visited my grandmother's grave, mourning the saucepan, but cherishing her memory. The summer's heat faded, but M's shadow lingered, a reminder of the fragility of trust. Months later, I walked through Stockholm, the city's lights a contrast to my darkened memories. The darkness I saw in her eyes in those final days is something I will never forget. M was gone, confined to a place I once worked. Her story a cautionary tale. I forgave her, not for her actions, but for the illness that consumed her. My work in mental health took on new weight, a mission to prevent such tragedies. I kept a photo of my cats, their eyes bright, a symbol of the home I'd fought for. If M's path ever crossed mine again, I'd face it with clarity, not fear, knowing I'd survived the unseen threat that once lived within my walls. The sting of a stranger. I was 18. I'm a very short girl, only about 4'10", and I get anxious when someone even looks at me in a way that suggests they might not like me. My world was small, fragile, every glance a potential threat. I avoided conflict like it was a storm, always seeking shelter in silence. So, needless to say, I'm incredibly non-confrontational. I preferred the background, unnoticed, safe. But safety is an illusion when the wrong eyes find you. My friend and I were out shopping. It was our ritual, a rare escape from college's grind. It was something we'd do maybe every few months just to bond, since we didn't have much time to hang out due to college. She was my mirror, small, quiet, a kindred spirit. She's just like me, barely scraping 5'1" and very non-confrontational. Our friendship was built on shared fears, a mutual need to stay unseen, until that day, when the unseen saw us. On every shopping trip, we would find ourselves at Ann Summers. The store was our haven, its racks of bras, a solution to our struggles. We're both overly endowed and struggled to find bras anywhere. Most shops failed us, their sizes too standard, too cruel. Ann Summers always had great sales, so we grabbed the cheap bras while we could. The discounts were a lifeline, a small victory in a world that rarely fit. We walked in, expecting familiarity, not danger. The shopping trip wasn't any different. We browsed shops until we got to Ann Summers, but that's when things took a bit of a turn. The air shifted as we crossed the threshold, the store's warmth replaced by something colder. A presence waited, one we couldn't ignore. I barely stepped foot into the shop when a woman with some sort of Slavic accent stopped me, and her finger jammed into my chest. The force was sharp, her voice a blade. "Spit the gum out," she demanded. I froze, my heart racing. Her eyes burned, accusing, as if I'd committed a crime. Assuming that she was an employee, I gave a very sheepish, "I'm really sorry," and ran out of the shop to spit the gum out and throw it away. My cheeks burned with shame, my apology automatic, instinctive. I was a child again, scolded, small. When I went back in, I realized that this woman was not an employee. The truth hit like a second blow. She was just a customer. Her authority, a lie. She was a customer who was browsing and happened to be near the door when my friend and I entered the shop. Her clothes were worn, her posture tense, a stroller by her side. No uniform, no badge, just a woman with a grudge. It should have been obvious to me. No salesperson would ever behave like that. But my fear had blinded me, made me obedient, not one that wanted to keep their job anyways. I crept back inside, my head low, my breath shallow. But I kept my head down when I walked past her, holding my breath in hopes that she wouldn't notice me again. She was a shadow I couldn't shake, and she didn't. And I thought I was in the clear. My friend and I moved through the aisles, our steps careful, our voices hushed. My friend and I browsed the shop, trying to avoid the woman. But the shop wasn't very big, probably only 15 feet by 18 feet. The space was cramped, her presence a weight we couldn't escape. So eventually, I ended up at the sales stand by the door where she had been stood. The discounts beckoned, a distraction from the tension. I tried to keep my distance while browsing. My hands trembled as I checked tags, my eyes darting to her. She was there, always there, watching. I was looking at the price tags, but realized that I didn't know what the discount was, so I leaned over slightly to check the discount sign. A simple act, innocent, necessary, but it was enough to ignite her. The stroller was her fortress, and I was too close. It's important that I note that this woman had a pushchair, which is a stroller for the Americans. It stood by the stand, a barrier between us. You'd think that she'd maybe had a child in this pushchair, but no baby, no toys, just bags. It was full of plastic carrier bags. They were double-bagged, knotted tightly, their contents hidden. I didn't look too much at it, but I could tell that everything in there was double-bagged and tied shut. She guarded them, her eyes flicking to the stroller with every move. Whatever was in those bags, she wanted to protect. Her protectiveness was a warning I didn't heed. This sense of protection became very relevant because when I leaned over to look at the discount sign, I was leaning slightly closer to her pushchair. I was careful, my body 3 feet away, my intent clear. But she saw an invasion, a threat. I was still about 3 feet away from it, but apparently it was too close. She moved like a predator, swift and silent. The woman was on the other side of the chair, but the moment she saw me, she ran around to it where I was stood. Her shadow loomed, and I was too slow to run. The pain came first, then the shock. She hits me in the face. The blow was sharp, a hybrid of slap and punch, landing on my cheek with a force that stole my breath. My world tilted, the store blurring as pain bloomed. It was somewhere between a slap and a punch, and I couldn't quite tell because I was in shock. My hand flew to my face, my skin stinging under my fingers. All I knew is that it hurt. Her voice was a hiss, venomous, close to my ear. "Watch the personal space," she hissed in my ear. The words cut deeper than the blow, accusing, condemning, and I apologized to her. My voice was small, automatic, a reflex born of fear. I was sorry for her violence, sorry for existing. This woman just hit me, and I apologized to her. The shame burned, a wound I'd carry. I regret it now, but at the time I didn't want to provoke her any further. I didn't know her rules, her triggers. Not that I knew what I did to provoke her in the first place. I was lost, adrift in her anger, and in my shock, I turned around and ran to the back area, grabbing my friend's hand and pulling her with me. My friend followed, her eyes wide, her silence a mirror of my fear. The back of the store was a fragile sanctuary. The back area was separated by a tiny wall that only stretched halfway across the shop, since they stored the adult toys there and wanted to keep them out of sight of the general public. The wall was low, barely a shield, but it was enough. I stood there, holding my friend's hand and shaking as I whispered, "She just hit me." To my friend, my voice cracked, the words barely audible. My cheek throbbed, my heart a drumbeat of panic. We stood there for a good minute in silence, and my friend was positioned in a way that she could see the rest of the store while I hid behind the wall. She was my sentinel, her eyes scanning for the woman. "She's gone," my friend told me. The words were a lifeline, pulling me from the edge, and it let out a breath that I didn't even know that I was holding. Relief flooded me, but it was fleeting. "Can we stay here for a while?" I asked my friend, worried that the woman would be outside waiting for me. The open storefront was a trap, the street beyond a gauntlet. She could be there, lurking, her stroller a beacon of her rage. We lingered, ghosts in our own story. My friend agreed, and we slowly browsed the shop again. Our movements were cautious, our joy stolen. We got to the counter to check out, and the girl working the counter looked outside and then back at us. Her face was pale, her voice low. That woman's been in here for a while. I didn't know what to do," she told the two of us. Her words confirmed my fear. She was a fixture, a danger we hadn't escaped. "What did she say to you?" I recounted the gum, the blow, my voice shaking. She told me to spit out my gum when we first came in. And then she hit me because I was too close to her. The cashier's eyes widened, horror dawning. "She hit you?" The worker was wide-eyed. If I'd have known that, I would have called security. I'm so sorry." Her apology was genuine, but it couldn't undo the pain. I smiled and shrugged. "It's fine." It wasn't fine, but blame wouldn't help. It wasn't really fine, but it wasn't the worker's fault. She was young, like us, caught in the same storm. She didn't look much older than I did, and I wouldn't have known what to do in that situation either. We left, but the fear followed, still shaken up. My friend and I made our way out of the store. The street was bright, crowded, but I saw her in every face. I looked around, but didn't see the woman. Relief was tentative, fragile. "Can we just go home now?" I asked my friend. The shops, once a joy, were now a threat. We hadn't finished browsing all the shops, but I was so paranoid that we bumped into that insane woman again. My friend nodded, her silence a comfort. She agreed, and we got the bus home. The ride was quiet, my cheek still tender, my mind replaying the blow. When I got home, my parents encouraged me to report the incident to the police. Their voices were firm, protective, urging justice. I called the non-emergency line, and their answer was basically, "Well, what do you expect us to do about it?" The officer's tone was dismissive, the system indifferent, unless I went back to Ann Summers and requested the security footage, which I wasn't sure if they actually had. They wouldn't do anything. I didn't go back. The store was tainted, a place of pain I couldn't face. The years haven't dulled the memory. Now I'm sure that that woman was likely to have been homeless and/or on drugs. Her bags, her protectiveness, it pointed to a life on the edge. Possessions or substances, her only anchor. It's the only explanation I can think of for the carrier bags and her protectiveness. But knowing doesn't erase the sting. She was human, broken, but her pain became mine. It was either everything she owned, or drugs, or maybe even both. I'll never know. But the weight of her anger lingers. I'm different now. Cautious, my eyes always scanning. I don't chew gum in stores, don't linger near strangers. Every crowd hides her face, every stroller her shadow. My friend and I still shop, but never there, never again. The world is smaller now, its edges sharper, and I carry her blow like a scar, a reminder that even the smallest spaces can hide the greatest threats. The cursed stage. The Chuck E. Cheese was a rotting shell, its faded sign barely visible in the dusk. I was a high school kid, stuck cleaning up after screaming kids and broken machines. The place felt wrong, like it was alive, its shadows whispering secrets no one else could hear. The claw machine was my first warning. It grabbed my hand, not by accident, but with intent. Its metal grip cold and unyielding. I escaped, but the animatronic's eyes followed me, lifeless yet knowing, as if it had seen my mistake and judged me for it. The next day, the stage came alive. Chucky, the mascot, didn't just malfunction, it raged, twisting in ways no machine should. Its gaze locked on me through the chaos. The kids screamed, but I felt it. This wasn't a glitch. It was a message. Alone after closing, the laughter started, low, mocking, echoing from nowhere. I swept the stage, heart pounding, knowing I wasn't alone. The air grew heavy, the lights dimmed, and Chucky's frozen stare seemed to shift, daring me to come closer. Then it struck. The animatronic broke free, crashing into me with a force that wasn't mechanical. It pinned me, its weight crushing, its silence deafening. I fought to survive, but the truth was clear. Something in this place wanted me gone. And it wasn't human. My first job was a nightmare. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese when I was in high school. It was my first and worst job ever. The place was grim. The place looked seedy enough from the outside, but it was even worse behind the scenes. I was a glorified janitor. I was basically just a janitor, so I was at the front lines of keeping the place from becoming a total dump. Management was useless. The manager didn't care about anything. Everything was broken. The arcade machines were always going out of order. The play areas were falling apart. And even the main Chuck E. Cheese animatronics didn't work right sometimes. It survived only because of no competition. The place only managed to stay in business because there were no other similar options in town. I wasn't equipped to fix anything. Technically, fixing stuff like that was part of my job description, but I was way too underqualified to do anything other than turning stuff off and on again. Days were chaos. Nights were lonely. During the day, it was always a madhouse. But then after close, it was just me staying late to clean up by myself. One night, things got strange. One night, I had something weird happen to me. In the arcade, a claw machine caught my eye. While I was sweeping through the arcade area, I noticed that in one of the claw machines, there was a stuffed animal dangling from the claw. A lamb hung from the claw, stuck. It was clenched shut under the foot of a little lamb, hovering right over the catch bin. No one had reported it. I thought it was weird that nobody had complained about the game stealing the win, but nobody was around to collect it anymore. I opened the machine to free it. I opened up the case, then forcefully opened the claw and released the lamb. The claw snapped shut on my hand. Almost as soon as the lamb dropped back into the pile, the claw clamped shut on my hand. It got me good. It wasn't painful, but I was trapped. It didn't hurt much, but my hand was completely stuck for a moment. I freed myself and shut it down. I managed to wrench my hand out. Then I shut the case and labeled the machine out of order. My pulse raced. My heart was racing afterward. I felt foolish, but alone. I looked around out of embarrassment, despite knowing nobody could have seen it. Then I noticed Chucky. There was one set of eyes on me, though, so to speak. The Chuck E. Cheese animatronic just so happened to be looking right at me. It was just positioned that way, but unsettling. It must have ended up in that position when it got turned off and then stayed like that. But it was still weird to feel like it watched me get caught up in a claw machine. I hid the stage. Either way, the curtain should have been drawn, so I went over and closed off the stage. I moved on. Then I went back to work as if nothing happened. The next day, it escalated. By the time I got home, I had forgotten about the incident with the claw, but I was quickly reminded the next day. I was cleaning near the stage. I was back at work, cleaning up a protein spill near the stage. The show was on, kids watching, the show was going on. There were a ton of kids between me and the stage who were watching the Chuck E. Cheese animatronic move around, do its thing. Chucky malfunctioned violently. Suddenly, Chucky started spazzing out. He malfunctioned so badly the music was skipping, and he was flailing around, contorting his joints in all sorts of positions. Chaos erupted. The kids started freaking out, and the adults were shouting. The system crashed, freezing Chucky. But then, after just a few seconds, the computer controlling the show finally crashed, and the whole thing stopped. He stared at me again. The Chuck E. Cheese animatronic was frozen in an unnatural position. Even for it. And once again, it just so happened to be staring right at me. I was rattled, but helped clear the stage. I couldn't help but be even more freaked out than the night before. but I had to snap out of it and help my coworkers off the stage. The machine stayed broken. There was nothing we could do for the machinery that day. I reported the claw issue, but got no response. I also told my manager about the claw machine, but he just waved it off and said he'd have a guy come fix it in a few days. That was part for the course for that guy. Though, I stayed to clean alone. I stayed for the rest of my shift. And as usual, I was still there cleaning after everyone else had gone home. The stage felt ominous. I eventually went behind the curtain to sweep and mop up the stage. With everything that had been going on, being alone in that place felt even more eerie than it normally did. Chucky's pose was unnerving. I made my way to center stage where Chucky was still petrified in that creepy pose with his arms bent back and everything, which didn't help to put me at ease at all. Then I heard it. Laughter. Sourceless. Surrounding me. I was just sweeping around him when I heard something. It sounded like laughter, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It actually felt like it was coming from all around me. I called out, but it grew louder. I shouted into the store that if anyone was there, we were closed and they had to get out. But the laughter persisted, only getting closer and closer until it was right on top of me. No one was there. I had my back turned to Chucky as I looked over the entirety of what I could see of the building, but there was nobody there. A noise came from behind. Then I heard another sound. A crack from right behind me. Chucky fell, crushing me. I turned around just in time to see Chucky break off of his mount and crash right into me. He weighed 200 pounds, slamming me right to the floor and crushing me. I screamed. Trapped. I panicked, screaming for help. No one would come. I quickly realized that nobody would be coming for another 12 hours. And if I didn't get this thing off me, I would be in big trouble. I pushed it off with effort, but the animatronic machine had me pinned. I had to gather all my strength and adrenaline to finally heave the thing off me. Bruised and shaken, I stood. I got to my feet, freaked out, and checked myself for injuries. Thankfully, I wasn't seriously injured. I just had a bunch of bruises and a messed up wrist. It wasn't broken, but it hurt like hell. Chucky fell right on it as I tried to hold him back out of reflex. I called my boss. Injured. I stepped outside and called my boss, telling him what happened and that I'd have to leave early. He dismissed me, accusing me of lying. He told me to finish my shift and save the tape so he could catch me in a lie about it just randomly falling over. I refused, mentioning compensation. I said I was too injured to work and that I'd probably need to file for workman's comp. He fired me. That's when he fired me on the spot. I let it go, too tired to fight. I knew I could probably sue and get some money out of him, but at the time, I was ready to just be done with the whole thing. Something felt wrong beyond neglect. I still believe there was more than just neglectful management tormenting me in that place. The incident wasn't the end. I couldn't shake the feeling that the place was cursed. Weeks later, I drove by and saw the Chuck E. Cheese shuttered, its sign dark. A friend said it closed after more accidents, machines sparking, curtains moving on their own. I started researching, finding old employee stories online about laughter in the dark, animatronics shifting at night. One claimed Chucky's eyes followed them, even when unpowered. Was it faulty wiring or something else? I don't know. I moved on, got a new job. But the memories lingered. Last month, I found a toy lamb in my mailbox, identical to the one from the claw machine. No note attached. I burned it, but sleep hasn't come easy since. Sometimes, I hear faint laughter in my apartment, low and mocking, like it's waiting for me to turn around. I don't know what was in that place, but it wasn't just broken machines. It was alive, and it knew my name. Thank you for listening till the end. Tomás, if you hear a knock at 3 a.m. tonight, don't answer it. Maybe the next story is coming. Symbiotus, for you. See you the Simpudas in your next nightmare.